Welcome everyone to the small business track. We are going to discuss the top 10 questions you should ask your IT provider. Before we get started, we actually want to give a big shout out to DCN. You can see the logo behind us for sponsoring us today. We appreciate them doing that for us today. For those of you that don't know, my name is Tanya Taplin. I'm a professor here at Bismarck State College in the cybersecurity department. And sitting next to me, I have Professor Kevin Fishbeck from University of Mary. And then on the other side of him, we have Professor Matt Freilich, also from Bismarck State College. So there are plenty good reasons for outsourcing your IT operations to a service provider, but doing so comes with some inherent risk. Today's organizations are entrusted with customers' financial data and other sensitive information, so it's never been more important to carefully evaluate potential service providers. A lot is at stake when it comes to IT management, especially around those security practices, business continuity and disaster recovery, supporting a mobile workforce, and more. The IT operation is the backbone of your business. You simply cannot afford to hire a provider that promises the world and doesn't deliver, or even worse, one that doesn't adhere to the right practices. So that starts us into our top 10 questions that we're going to talk about today. One of the main ones that we need to consider is, where is our information? Where is it being stored? So the first question is, where are our backups? For that one, I'm going to let both Matt and Kevin weigh in on this, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. As we were kind of thinking about this session and questions that, happen to come up quite a bit with our customers and people that we talk about in the industry, it's always, where is my data? What happens if I get ransomware? What happens, if I lose something? Can I get it back? Where are those stored? Where are those located? So I think it's always a good idea to ask your service providers, hey, what are we doing with our data? Are we testing our backups? There's a lot of different places to keep your data. There's a lot of different places that you can use, whether it's in-house or in the cloud or all those sorts of things. Kevin, I don't know about you, but I like to use cloud storage quite a bit for my customers, just because it's always there, it's always on, it's always available.
Yeah. I guess the only issue we ever had with cloud storage is that, some companies, depending on who they have to be compliant with, they have to verify the physical geographical location of their cloud storage. For instance, for whatever reasons, it may not be able to be stored overseas. So you need to verify with your cloud backup provider that these are stored in Cincinnati or these are stored in San Jose, that they're going to be within the lower 48, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Matt, I totally agree. Backups, cloud backups is a good one. The Department of Homeland Security recommends a rule of three. Basically, 3 backups, 3 different types of backups in 3 different locations. And one of those backups should always be offline, so it does not have access to the internet. It does not have access to ransomware. So that's what I do.
Like a tape, hard drive.
Exactly.
Take it off-site with you.
Yep.
Those sorts of things.
Exactly.
Going back to your comment on compliance, I tend to deal a lot in the medical arena, and they're HIPAA compliant. And so with that, you have to get what's known as a business associate agreement signed. Basically what that says is, hey, if the service provider you're using gets ransomware or they get hacked, they're going to notify you. What are they going to do around that data breach? Are they going to mitigate it? Are they going to notify you? How is that all going to work? So not every provider is willing to sign those or provide one of those, so that's always something that I look for.
Tanya, any other tips from backups?
No, I guess I just want to point out, which everybody probably already knows, is that recovering that data is expensive. So we want to make sure that you do have those backups so that we can basically eliminate those problems that'll arise if we lose that data. And we want to make sure that we do test it, just like you mentioned earlier. So that brings us to our second question, and that is what to do, in case of some type of disaster. So what happens if there is a fire? Do we have the documentation and the passwords that we need to recover from that what type of service would this, your provider support to your company if this should happen. And Kevin, I think I'll let you start on that one.
Yeah, this was kind of one of my ideas. And just to give you a little background, Matt, Tanya, and myself all have had years of experience in helping small business and supporting small business. But what I've seen over the years, one of the most frustrating things that I've come across is a lack of documentation. And it's the person who I'm following. And it could, simple as what's the password for the servers, what's the password for the routers, what is a map of the equipment in the area, where are the wiring closets, where are the main distribution facilities, where does the internet come into the building, how is it split up, who's the providers. So I always think of it, God forbid if something would happen to me and Matt had to follow my footsteps and they gave him a phone call, what would Matt need to know when he comes on site? So Matt can take over and he could provide the service that I gave them, or hopefully even better service than I gave them in the past. So once again, documentation, which include maps, passwords, and any other information that's pertinent for the next person that comes into play.
That's what sticky notes on devices are for.
Yeah, sticky notes fall off eventually.
Yeah, well, I think that's so important too, because if you need to get a consultant in there, or maybe you need to step away from your customer, maybe you're going on vacation, your service providers do that every now and then. So then, what do? You need those passwords, you need that documentation. If you're paying a consultant hourly and they got to spend the first 3 hours trying to figure out what the IP address of something is, that tends to add up quick. So when I took Kevin's class way back in the day, he always recommended, behind each machine or some sort of structure, you have notes on what the IP addresses are, what the passwords are, recent problems that it's had, updates that you've done, just that documentation so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. For me, there's nothing more frustrating than, twiddling your thumbs trying to figure out what's going on here with this network and just having to think about it, for a long period of time instead of fixing the issue at hand.
Yeah, and another thing too I've seen with small business is everyone's unique, right? If it's a medical facility, if it's a law facility, they run their own third-party software. And if I run something and I get it working, of course, it may not be a best practice how I got up and running. Then Tanya comes along and takes a look at it and says, what was this guy thinking? This is not best practice by far. But maybe after a while, she'll try to change things and then realize that maybe the way I was doing it or the way the business was running it is probably as good of a best practice that you can be, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, I really like that comment. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think about that when I configure something for a business. I'm like, what's the next guy going to think about that configuration? Where if I have some documentation on, okay, that's why he did it, that's what he was thinking. That's why he put it in this subnet range or whatever it happens to be. I think that goes a long ways. And like I said, it just kind of, in my mind, kind of validates, what you did a little bit so that they don't think, what the heck was this guy doing?
So our next question, question number 3, how much do we need to budget fiscally per year for our system? For me, I guess in my experience, this really does depend largely on your organization, what kind of data you're protecting, what are you doing, what, kind of customer base that you have, how many employees you have, do you have specialized software, is there special hardware that you need to, be supporting, are there a certain number of servers? If I have 2 servers, I have to protect instead of, like 10 or 15, the number of devices, even printers, though everything adds up. So for me, it's hard to budget just because it really does depend on the customization for that customer, as everyone's needs are going to be different. There's nothing that I think, no price that is across the board that is a one size fits all.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Tanya on that. She brought up something, printers. A lot of businesses will go by the plan of 3 to 5 years of a lifespan for a computer, which is normal. Every 3 to 5 years, they'll try to swap those out with new ones, but we don't think of printers because printers have lives too. A lifespan. Routers have a lifespan. Your switches have a lifespan. All your equipment that's plugged into your network has a lifespan. So, when you budget, we're just not budgeting computers. You may be even budgeting for a service, for somebody to monitor your equipment, for somebody doing antivirus on that equipment. So there's a lot of variables that come into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables. You have that initial upfront cost, and then you have your reoccurring cost. I think that's an excellent question to, ask the person that's providing service. Is this like a one-time deal, or are you going to come knocking, a year, 3 months, or 3 years down the road for a subscription cost, or for a new server, or for a new printer? I see that a lot of, customers kind of fall into that mindset of, well, I bought this 5 years ago, isn't it still good? You mean I got to replace these things? They don't last forever. I always use the examples of vehicles, right? You got to maintain them, you got to put money into them, and eventually they're going to wear out. Yeah, you can keep them going for a long time. You can stick Band-Aids on IT equipment and those sorts of things, but they're not going to last forever, and you have to put it into your budget. You have to plan. One of the things I like to do with my customers is try to give them sort of a true operating cost month over month. So I try to come up with, a price structure where they can expect that bill every single month for the maintenance and the management and the updating and the troubleshooting and all of that. Sometimes it's kind of hard to, invoice someone for 10 or 15 hours at $100 a pop, because that's a huge expense. So to try to give them a true operating cost where it's going to cost you X amount of dollars every single month, and that's going to take care of everything in terms of, maybe the labor side or the licensing side. I think that helps for them to plan and to budget. It's always good to keep that in the back of your mind, I think. So it's hard to give an exact number, but a good service provider should be able to plan with you, right? They should be able to sit down with you once a year or once a quarter and say, hey, this is what's on the horizon, this is what we've spent in the past. Let's think about planning and budgeting for that. You shouldn't really have any unexpected bills unless something, unless there's a catastrophe, unless something fails, or there's some sort of happening beyond your control.
And you have to have that conversation too. What are the hour expectations? Is it 8 to 5? Will you be in on weekends? Will it be nights? Will there be downtime during the day? Some small businesses do not like that, because when they're online during the day, that's when they're generating their revenue. So is the service going to be less in the evening? Is it going to be more? It's all up to the individual company and your service provider.
Okay. So the next one, we have question number 4. Can you help with planning for our system upgrades? I guess for this, obviously, yes, we can, help plan for those upgrades, but you have to be also aware, I guess, in my situation or in my experience, that if you have those dedicated systems that only, your company has, and that's probably not very common to that service provider that you select, where they don't have experience in that there's probably going to be some additional hours, because it takes time for that service provider to be able to figure out exactly what you need, figure out like if it's certain database requirements, whatever it may be, and how complex is that system. So I think those all play a part in that. And, you also need to know, if there's maintenance on it and updates, does that affect your productivity? If there's downtime, things like that. Is that service provider, you have to work with them and make sure that you find a time that works for everyone involved for those upgrades.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what Kevin said, like, when are you available? Are you doing these upgrades and migrations and things only 8 to 5, or are you coming in on the weekend and in the evening? A lot of managed service providers, consultants, they want to work 8 to 5, and it costs you more for them to come in on the weekend and the evening. So that's a big conversation, I think, because you don't want to have to spend 1.5 times or 2 times the hourly rate because they're having to come in off hours, so to speak. I guess another thing I would say about the systems upgrades is it goes back to the planning, right? Like, again, this shouldn't be something that is unexpected. It's something that you've been talking about for a while, and they don't just come into your office on a Monday morning and say, hey, we're doing an upgrade tomorrow. You need to be aware of that. You need to plan that. So you really need to think of your service providers with all the questions we've asked so far, and ones we will, is are they true partner of you, or are they just a consultant? Hopefully you can find yourself someone that's a true partner and that you can have that dialogue with, and they're almost like an employee, but they're on their own and they're independent, and they just have a good working knowledge of how you operate and how you make your money and how you treat your own customers, so that they can work with you and around those sorts of constraints.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to the system upgrade part, for instance, if I work with an eye clinic, I'm not there to tell them how to check eyes. That's their profession. That's what, and they know that up and down. But as a lot of our peripheral equipment today, they'll come to me and say, we just need an internet connection. That's all we need. But, we know as IT professionals that really it becomes the IoT, the Internet of Things, right? And any device that's connected to your network is now a host. So we need I need to know a little bit more about that piece of equipment you're hooking up, and see if that can be a detriment to any other piece of equipment or a liability to anything that's on your network. So it's not just saying, I need an internet connection to it, because it becomes the IoT. Experience you guys have had with those.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. IT is kind of one of those weird industries where, all of the end users use the equipment on a day-to-day aspect, right? So they have a little bit of knowledge of it, and they think maybe they can set it up, so they just need internet access. But really, it's so much more complex. And really, we hope that's why you're hiring a consultant or a service provider, is because we know a little bit more. We know how to secure it. We know how to set it up correctly from the start. Like you said, you're not going to go to an eye clinic and tell them how to do an eye exam. Right. But in IT, you tend to get told sometimes on what to do and how to do it. And so I think you kind of need a service provider that's willing to be upfront with you and kind of tell you like it is, so to speak, so that you're getting the proper advice. And no, it's not just internet connection. It's you need internet, but we need it on the right subnet. We need it secured, and we need a firewall rule, and all these different things that go along with it.
Excellent points. Yeah, I agree with all of those. Anything else you'd like to add, Kevin, on that one?
Just beware of the IoT. Beware of the Internet of Things.
All right, so our next question that we have, it's kind of a longer question, and some of it we have already kind of touched on it a little bit. So what is your response time? That's definitely a question that you want to ask. Also, do you provide, different levels of support? What is the scope of your services? What time of day, hours of the day and week are you available? Are you available after hours, on weekends, holidays, things like that? So you want to make sure that you're aware of that when picking those service providers out, who you're going to go with. And one good example, or one thing that you want to think about in your contract, is to have, SLA. Do we want to have, those types, or an agreement in place? And just because it tells, what expectations that, you have and what your, what our needs are. And so that you have a clear picture, basically. And, it's so important to ask those prospective IT service providers about their availability, or their model for availability. And I think you also need to know who is doing the support. Many companies, if you're a small business, you probably are going to hire someone that came, as a recommendation, because a friend of yours or a business owner that you do work with, they recommended this individual. So you need to know who is doing it. And depending on the type of information that you are trying to protect, right? It could be confidential. Do you have, HIPAA laws or PCI DSS compliance requirements? You need to know who has access to that information. And, one way you can add an extra level of, security would be to do background checks on all of those employees that have access to that information and your data. So I guess that's just my perspective.
And background checks on your providers also.
Right. Yep.
I would agree.
I'll take a slightly different approach on this from the IT perspective. So if I'm the one providing the service, that scope, right? That scope is huge, because there's always scope creep. And hey, I came to fix the printer, and then what happens? Oh, can you fix Susie's computer and the server and a million other things? So having that scope looking at that from the reverse side, if you are the customer of that provider, what are they going to provide? Do they say, nope, I don't touch printers at all? I only do the server, I only do the network, or I only do the video cameras, or whatever it happens to be. I think you see that out there a lot of specializations, right? And so you might hire someone what you think is going to fulfill all of your needs, but then they come in and say, oh no, I don't know how to do the firewall, or I don't touch the firewalls for liability purposes, or whatever. So now you're getting another consultant in there. So it's really good to have, like you said, those SLAs in place, those IT scopes. What exactly are you getting? What are you willing to work on? And then again, as the IT provider, really being able to hone in on that, because you tend to get pulled in multiple directions. Oh, IT, that means you can fix my phone, right? Or, oh, IT, can you help me with streaming video, or whatever it happens to be. Just because you know technology, then that means you know how to fix everything, is what it seems like. So I think those are very important things to have in place. And then we've kind of mentioned it before too, with the times available. Are you coming off hours? Is that going to cost me more, or is that written into the contract or that service level agreement? What is your response time? If I call you, let's say, noon on a Friday, are you going to work on it over the weekend so I'm up and running on Monday? Or are you going to wait until the following week? What is your response time? I think that one is huge, especially for small business, because they rely so much on the internet and they don't have anybody in-house, right? So if the internet or the network goes down, they can't make any money. So it might be worth it, if you're a small business, to pay for just a little extra support to guarantee that you can be up and running by the next business day.
Yeah, Matt, and I'll add to that too. When you think about system upgrades for small businesses, I've been told when our system's down, we're losing $1,000 an hour. So you need to have the system up and running for us. Well, if I come during the middle of the day, then you're losing $1,000 an hour, this particular business. So it might be better to pay me a little more, or my company, and I'll come in after hours and I'll do the system upgrade. Another classic example, this has been told to me a number of times, but when will the system be available for the upgrade? And usually it's over the holidays, and they'll tell me, well, we're all done working at Christmas Eve at noon, so you can start at 1 o'clock. Well, I have Christmas Eve too, right? But we have to work with the small businesses and work with your provider to see what times are going to work for you. But just have a little bit of empathy for your providers.
Yeah. All right.
One other thing that I wanted to actually add to that is when you're working on those SLAs and you're trying to figure out, what kind of cost, there are different types of pricing models too that you can include. Like you could do, a fixed model, like, it's unlimited support for a month, right? So with that, I'm going to make sure that you have all of, Windows updates and, any like small thing, printer issue that, a paper jam and, I can't, figure out where that piece of paper is stuck in the back of the printer. So you have like those issues or those pricing models. You could do a variable where, basically that, you just look at that certain problem. And, then what comes into play though, like if you do a variable rate, then what if I fix something last month, right? And now it's broken, and now I have to go out and fix it again. And then you have your customer, well, you've already fixed that for me. I shouldn't have to pay for it twice. So that's where that fixed rate really is kind of nice, because it includes all of that. Or you can do another third option, which is just, by incident. So I'm going to just fix this one thing. I'm going to set up that PC, or I'm going to clean the virus off for it. And, this is just my flat per hour charge. So, I think it is beneficial for a small business to probably look at some type of fixed, billing structure, just because it takes out a lot of the other variables that you are, I guess, exposed to.
Yeah, and it may be simpler for them to budget.
Right, that as well too. Yeah.
It's kind of like balance billing on your light bill, right, or your gas bill over the summer.
Yeah, I like that, like you said, because what happens in IT, you fix something one time and the next time you come back and it's broke, and just happens that way, right? And so if you take your car into the mechanic and they fix it and it doesn't work right, a week later you take it back and you expect them to fix it for free this time, right? Because they were supposed to fix it that first time and they never did. So having that upfront with the customer, like I'm going to charge you X amount of dollars and I'm going to guarantee that it works. Or you say, I'm going to fix it this time. It's going to cost me 3 hours, but if it breaks again, I'm going to have to charge you the next time. So just being upfront, I think, goes a long ways, because then they know whether or not they're going to get a bill.
So the next question we're going to talk about is, how do we contact you if you have an issue? So are we contacting you by, email, by phone, text message? There's lots of different ways. I guess we want to make sure that is in, some type of service level agreement, the preferred method, and list those hours that are included in there. Are you allowed to call, on weekends and in evenings, for that type of pricing model that you've selected, if you decide to do like a fixed option like we had mentioned. I don't know, Kevin, Matt, like how do you normally handle that with your consulting?
Well, I guess phone call, text message, email, I'll take any one of those. Nothing's more frustrating for a customer to tell them, you need to contact me via email, and their internet's down, so they can't contact you, right? So, there's the text, there's chatting if you want to do online. I don't do any of that. So I guess that's a conversation I recommend you got to have with your customers.
Yeah, I prefer text, because that way it's always on me and I have record. I know some places around town like to do tickets, and that works great to keep track of. Sometimes customers don't like it because they're always creating tickets, but as the IT person, what you have on your slate. It's easy to keep track of. The ticketing system might work well for you. I've heard of other places that kind of have a dedicated website that you would create your tickets in, versus like emailing off and creating a ticket. But like you said, if internet's down, then what do you do? So I think all of those are good options. It's just good to know how that works, because you might have a preferred method. I like text messaging, but if my customer doesn't, they don't like texting and they don't like being on their cell phone, they might hate it. So just being upfront with how that's going to work and how that process is going to play out between making that initial contact and getting the problem fixed, I think it's helpful to have that laid out.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd like to specify is, I like a punch list. If I'm going to go to a place, is it just, what are your expectations today? Because I want to budget my time too. If I plan to spend an hour with you today, I budgeted that, and I get there and, it's the scope creep. We have this, we have this, we have this we'd like you to do. And just, for your provider, that is a preferred method if you do the ticket system, because they'll know exactly what to expect. But if you don't do something like that, do something like a punch list so they know what to expect and they can budget enough time for you when you get there.
Okay. All right, so our next one, what software and hardware will be in place to protect our system?
I think the conversation around this question was, there is no magic bullet. There's no such thing as 100% security. So if someone comes into your small business and tries to sell you that product, it doesn't exist. So you should be skeptical. Yeah. But at the same time, you do want to know what they're offering. Is it firewall and antivirus? Is it anti-spyware? What exactly is in place to protect your systems? Is it the backups that we talked about before? It's always been important, but it just seems like with today's ransomware that it's even more and more important. So what things are in place? What things are they doing to protect your system? Or are you just paying someone to come fix issues? Sometimes that's all you need. Mm-hmm. But I think that was kind of the thought process around that question when it came up.
Yeah, and Matt, I couldn't agree more. There is no magic bullet. There's nothing that's 100%, but I really want to educate the small business owners out there about the different types of routers. And I see a lot of different routers in small businesses, and I know you can go to Best Buy and you can pick one up for $250 or $100 or $300. And then there's the ones that are a little more expensive out there. You might spend $1,500 or $2,000, but they'll do like a deep packet inspection, and they're able to do different types of logging where some of your cheaper routers are not able to do that. Now you got to ask, what is your level of comfort with those? You might be just fine with one of the Best Buy routers or ones that you get from the box stores, but you will be more secure if you have a router that can do deep packet inspection, but also understand it's not 100%. So I know the cost-benefit ratio there, that's a business decision you need to make of how much you want to put into that type of hardware.
Agreed. Yeah. Security is expensive, and there's a lot of different types of security out there, and you can really spend whatever you want on it. So you have to ask your provider, what am I exactly paying for here, and why is that better than the box store router? And does it come with a subscription cost, and all of these different things? If you truly value security, you're going to have to spend some money. It goes back up to that budgeting question. Or are you simply just trying to, keep your business up and running? We're hoping to get everybody, and it's kind of the point of this conference, right, is to get you thinking about cybersecurity, why it's important, why you need to spend some money and time on it. Hopefully you're not thinking about it after a breach or after you've had to, call the police sort of thing. So I guess the point is there's no magic bullet, and it does, cost some money.
Okay. So the next one, this is a question that is asked all the time. Do you provide training, education? There's always some type of new software, app, or hardware, anything that these customers, are, I guess, purchasing or they want to implement in their business. So, are you able to provide training for that? And obviously, yes, we can do that, but, if it's outside of that normal service agreement that we've talked about before, then you need to be aware of that it's going to take, depending on what it is that you need for your, education, their training, that we may have to, learn and figure some of that stuff out too. So that is, takes time on our part as well before we can provide some type of training that is effective in the way that you're hoping it can be.
It kind of goes back to that. Well, IT, you should know how to do this already for
Right.
us and teach us how to do it, and those sorts of things. One thing I would kind of add on to the training and the learning aspect is some people, when I work with someone on fixing something, some people could care less. They just want you to fix it and go along their merry way. Other people want to know how you fixed it so that they can do it themselves next time. And if you're one of those people, just tell the person that. That way they can, tell you what you're doing, what they're doing, and how they're fixing it, and those sorts of things. I always operate under the premonition that they don't care. They just want me to fix it. So I just click, fix it, done. And then they'll come back like, well, how did you do that? Why didn't you tell me how to do that? I'm like, oh, I didn't think you cared. So if you want to know and you want that education and you want that training, just let that person know. And most times, they're happy to help.
Yeah, I think a couple things with education training, Tanya, I couldn't agree more. We need to educate. Your employees, people, are the weakest security link in any organization. So we constantly need to train. There's an old saying out there that says it's better to train and lose an employee than to not train and keep the employee. So I really believe in continually training for phishing, training for security breaches. What if we get breached? What do we do? Who do we call? How do we know we're breached in the first place? So we need to constantly train our staff.
I like your comment the other day is you said, you can't prevent that user from clicking next.
Yeah.
Like you said, the person is kind of the weakest link. So if you can train, you can educate, that can go a long ways.
Yeah. And I've clicked next and had some unexpected consequences. You're going, what have I done?
I don't blame people at all. I mean, how do you know if you're not in IT and you're not in that world? How do you know what you're supposed to click on and what's a valid message that pops up on a website and what's a valid attachment and all these things? It's complicated. It's hard. So if you can train your users just a little bit, that can really help. Hopefully, you're training them to not click next and to pick up the phone and call. I know it's annoying as a service provider to get those calls, but it saves you a lot of time from having to rebuild the server.
I actually, this morning in one of my classes, we were talking about phishing, social engineering, and there was statistics that I saw over the weekend, and it was if you can get somebody to click on that email, 76% of those people will go through and they will actually put in their credentials. So I thought that was, interesting statistics for that.
A small.
Yep, it might even be higher.
Right, but a small. How do I want to say this? A small percentage will click on it, but once they click on it, the 75% will actually fill it out, which is just wow.
Right.
All you need is one.
Right.
All you need is one.
All you
Yep.
need is one.
And then your ransomware.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then one other thing, just before we go to the next question too, is when, providing this training and the education, some customers like to have some type of training documents. So if you want to create those documents for them, just, it's an option, just that, it is probably, outside of that service level agreement, but it probably will help them in the long run in protecting their data and keeping that secure. So the next question we have is, what type of proactive preventative maintenance are you doing? So I guess I'll let you guys start this one out.
Well, I guess the first one, because of mine, is updates. It's not just the operating system updates, but you need to inventory every piece of software that you're running on your system. It might be the Office suite, it could be WordPerfect, it could be some third-party application. I don't care what third-party application I've seen, they all have updates, they all have service packs, they all have service releases. So to inventory all this software that you're running, make sure you have the updates. And even then, you're 95% secure, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the updates.
Yeah, that's the big one. They come out with updates for a reason, right?
Yep.
And you need to apply them. You need to have some sort of mechanism in place so they're consistently being applied. And hopefully your service provider has a way to track that, like you said, whether it's documentation or they have some sort of dashboard or console where they can see, oh, PC 12 hasn't updated in the last 2 weeks. Now they go out and they fix it versus waiting for the customer to call. That type of proactive and preventive maintenance can really go a long ways.
Okay. So we would just want to make sure that we prevent those problems before they happen, and we want to avoid being the fixer, right? We want to avoid being the person that's just putting out fires all the time. We can prevent doing that by simple updates, things like that, firmware updates. Then you want to make sure that your provider is doing that for you.
And I compare it to like vehicle maintenance, right? You change your oil, you put on new tires before you get a flat tire, right? When you see your tires are getting down, you constantly do those updates. So it's vehicle maintenance, it's computer maintenance, it's system maintenance.
From a service provider's perspective, the less we get called, the more money we make, right? Time is money. So if I don't have to come in and fix a bunch of issues, if I don't have to put out fires all the time, like you said, that goes a long ways for me for my bottom line and my bottom dollar. So what can I do as a service provider to prevent those having to put out fire things all the time and going around and fixing these little issues? If I can get a smooth, well-run system, my hope is that you never see me as a service provider. I can just sit back and I can proactive maintenance everything and not have to go fix issues and put out fires. So that's kind of what we strive for really as a service provider, is being able to implement those things so that we're not on site or remoting in all the time.
That's a great point, Matt. I know some people say, like, we didn't even see you this month. Why are we paying you? And then you ask, well, did it work this month? Did everything go as planned? Then I'm doing my job, right?
Exactly.
Yep. And that's how you want it too.
Right.
I mean, the less you see, honestly, of us, the better, because then it just means that everything is running smoothly.
Yep.
So do all of the work in the background if we can.
Yep.
All right, so our next question is, what are your qualifications? I mean, do you ask your service provider, kind of certifications you have, what kind of background expertise, do you have references, etc.? And, this goes back to, again, one of the other questions where I talked about, it's important to know who's doing your work. You want to make sure that, that you have those background checks done, when needed. You want to verify their experience. I guess that's just, my take
It's
on
not
it.
my cousin's doing my IT.
Right.
Get that a lot, actually.
Yes.
It's like, well, my brother's sister's cousin's husband's doing
Yeah.
it. It's like, well, what does your cousin's brother, sister, husband know about IT? Well, they know how to do a few things. It's hard. It's a cost. It's an expense. Unfortunately, a lot of people see IT as an expense. It's hard to justify that cost. So kind of trying to shift that mindset into, no, actually IT is an investment, keeping your business up and running so you can make money, so you can take payment, so you can do all those different things. Trying to reverse that thinking again of that it's investment it's difficult. So I think for me, that's kind of where this question came about, is I tend to get that a lot, is, oh, my cousin's doing it, my brother's doing it. Yeah, but what does your cousin or your brother No. Would you let your cousin or your brother fix your car? Probably not. So what is their background? What are their certifications? What other types of clients do they have? Are they in that industry? Do they, if I'm in the medical field, do they work with other medical clinics? What do they do? What are their backgrounds and those sorts of things? I think those are good, valid questions to ask.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I've seen become more popular over the past few years is the specialization. I'm seeing a lot of small businesses that may farm out or hire out that they're just doing the printing needs, all right? So we hire a company that just takes care of all our printing, scanning, copying. One company comes in and does that. Another company is going to provide our firewall service, and we're going to go through just this company, and they're just going to do firewall. Another company is taking care of our PC needs. So we have PC needs, we have firewall needs, we have printing needs, and then everyone comes to me as the IT we just need network access, right? We just need network access. We just need network access, which can be okay depending on your small business. So I've seen that. Tanya, have you seen that, or Matt? Have you?
Too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes,
Yeah.
but other times it works well. From my perspective, I love when they have a printer guy that just does the printers, because those take up time and effort and tend to be a lot of the calls. But at the same time, I tend to see, that printer guy is not communicating with the service provider, so now they're putting something on the network that shouldn't be there. Or vice versa, the network guy is changing up the network, so now the printer doesn't work because we just messed up the IP address or something that's on it. So if you have all those kind of different cogs working there, you need to make sure that they're aware of each other and communicating. I think another big one to throw in there is the phone service, right? That tends to be something that's separate too.
They're going all IP phones now, a lot of small businesses, and the IP phones directly connect into the networks.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I think too that people should be aware of when they're interviewing for a potential service provider is, a lot of times, and I've seen this many times, where these companies will come in and they'll like, these are my techs, this person does this, this, and this, and this, and they bring their top techs in, and they sell it to you. But then in the end, when you actually have a problem, that's really not the person that you end up seeing. Mm-hmm. So, and then you have somebody that has no idea, and so you need to make sure that when you interview these people, and the people that show up for your interview, or when you're calling them, that those are the people that are actually going to be doing the work.
Yes, there's nothing more frustrating than having to re-explain the issue to 5 different people because they brought the lowest tech in, and that keeps having to be escalated, and then they ask you the same question on the phone. So, bring them in, talk to them. Hey, who am I actually going to call? Who am I actually going to talk to? Are you the guy that's going to do the service, or are you just selling me on this? I think that's a good, valid point.
Okay. So our next question, and it's also our last question, is, are you familiar with compliance requirements? And I think, Kevin, that was kind of more of a question that you had talked about and brought up, so I'll let you head this one.
Well, like I said, I've supported a variety of small businesses, from the healthcare to just your Main Street business. And a classic example is probably 5 years ago, a small business wanted to begin accepting credit card for payment. They were pretty traditional in the past. They always used cash or check, but credit card is another method of payment, and they had to be PCI compliant. So their first question to me is, what is PCI compliant? So I quickly Googled it. No. I'm familiar with PCI compliant, but we run software to see what services are running on the network and what services need to be shut off to make them PCI compliant. And once they were able to accept credit cards, they increase their revenue, their payment, because that's just a common form of payment now. So most small businesses have to be the PCI compliant if they're accepting credit card. When I see some of the healthcare, some of the eye clinics dealing with the HIPAA, Matt, I know you've had some experience with those, probably more than I am with the compliance.
Yeah, it's difficult, and you can be fined, right? Whether you're the service provider or you're the small business, there can be consequences for not being up to compliance. So you need to ask your service providers, what is their level of expertise with that compliance? How do they handle it? What I always tell my customers, if they have some sort of compliance, whether it's PCI or HIPAA, is I'm going to make my best effort recommendations for you based on my knowledge I have. But if you truly want to be and need to be compliant, we need to get third-party audits in here. We need to get HIPAA lawyers. We need to get the appropriate personnel in here that deal with just that day in, day out. You think about, your hospitals or your major businesses around town, they have in-house IT, but I almost guarantee you they're probably doing some sort of external audit or getting some sort of external consultant in there just to handle that piece of it. So you can't expect your one-man or your small shop IT provider to guarantee that you are compliant. If it's truly important to you and a requirement, you need to take one step further and get someone else in there just to get another eye on it, or to do some sort of audit or whatever it happens to be, so that you can be fairly confident that you truly are compliant.
Yeah, I'd second that, Matt, for the audit part. I like that. You get a second set of eyes, a second person, second company in there, take a look at it. Second set of eyes. Tanya?
I agree with you, both of you. All right, well, with that, we are out of time. If you have any questions for us, we are going to do a quick Q&A section, so you can go ahead and use the chat window to answer or to ask those questions, and we will get back to you on those. Thanks for tuning in and watching us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.